Hey, what's up everybody? This is Superbrick501 and today I want to show you guys the Ailment build that I've been using in Wolcen pretty much since the campaign. Now, this build is really good for newer players and people that don't have a lot of gear because it's super easy to use, and for lower tier expeditions, it's very quick to clear a lot of the mobs so you can level up those expeditions much quicker. Now, I have not gotten it to the super high tier, so I don't know if this is going to work at 187s, so I'm not sure how it's going to work in there. I think I've been in like 140s to 150s with somebody else. I'm currently up to 136 myself, so it does work with that. But that brings some caveats. The game is currently very broken, more than it usually is, because the transfer between willpower and rage is completely broken. It just randomly sometimes doesn't work. It just randomly will take like a chunk of your willpower or rage away for whatever reason. There's a ton of other bugs. The servers have been bad. It actually took me a bunch of tries just to get one clear of an expedition level, which is what you're going to see in the video. And even at the end, the boss didn't have any of the breaks where they go broken and are stunned for a bit. So it's been pretty bad in the game right now. I could have gotten them much higher, but I haven't even been able to do 3 levels of expeditions very much at all without the game crashing or without getting massive lag spikes to where I just die in like a 20-second lag spike or something like that. So take that in consideration, but the build is still pretty good. And I think I'll be able to get it up to the really high end of expeditions once I get a little bit better gear and once the servers are good and the game's not broken. So with that being said, we're going to go into the skills. Now, I'm still pretty new to Wolcen, so I'm still learning everything, but this is pretty much how I understand ailments to work. And ailments are super important for this build because we use most of them, and curse is the most important, which comes from shadow damage because of one of our passive talents. Now, how I understand the ailments to work is that on the spells can have 2 ailments, and the first one is pretty much always going to be whatever you choose on the spell or what the spell naturally is. So say for Anomaly, I switch it to lightning, so the first ailment it rolls is shock, and then for the second one, it's pretty much what the highest damage rolls on your gear is. And since I put 3 shadow damage gems into my weapon, all of my spells rolled curse as a secondary stat, which is important because of that passive I went over before. So first off, we should go into stats. Mainly for wisdom, you want ailment chance at like 20%. I would say should be good enough for pretty much everything. I have 32%. I didn't go any into this with my actual stat allocation. It's mainly just from gear. It's a bit high. I could definitely get better rolls that is not so much into ailment chance or into wisdom. So mainly what I'm doing is I'm going 8 into toughness and then 2 into ferocity for every level. And the ferocity is mainly for just the crit, and the toughness you really need. I have almost 100k HP and I still get destroyed by some stuff sometimes. So going into toughness is incredibly important for this build and most of the builds in the game. So you want to go mostly into that toughness. Now for the spells, our first one is Tear of Ethiel. A lot of these modifiers you could definitely change to what you want. There's only a few modifiers for every skill that are completely needed. So first we have willpower cost reduction, then we have critical chance score, then we have average damage increase, then we have the one which is the main one for Tear of Ethiel. It turns it into a damage over time in an area instead of one big drop, which will do more ailment, which will stack up the ailment more, and it will do more damage over time, quite a bit more damage. Then we have critical damage increase, and then we have increased ailment damage. So our secondary spell is Lightbringer. Now our Tear of Ethiel is actually freeze. All of our spells are pretty much curse. Our Lightbringer is stasis. It actually does some other stuff, but we'll go over that when we go into it. Our Plague Burst is poison, but this is another thing I don't fully know why this happens, but this changes from poison to I think stasis. So I think stasis is like our secondary roll. So sometimes it changes, but most of the time we still can get our poison stacks up from one of our other passives. Our Anomaly is shock, and then our Solar Fall is burn. So we have most of the ailments in the game, and this build is really good. So for Lightbringer, we have Holy Ground. It leaves an area that deals damage over time, which is good for the different elements. We have Across the Cosmos, converts it from sacred to ether damage, so that's our stasis. Then we have critical chance score again. Then we have this one as well, inflict weakness and shock. This is pretty much where our weakness comes from, and shock is just extra. We already have shock, but this also inflicts our weakness, which it doesn't show it on the actual card when you go over the spell, but I think modifiers, if there's a modifier like this, it will apply the other ailment, which normally wouldn't happen. Then we have ailment chance score, and then we have increased average damage. So our third spell is one of our most important spells, which is Plague Burst. Now pretty much what Plague Burst does, because this ties into 2 different skills. Plague Burst, you place down this circle or at your cursor, which is one of the modifiers I have, you can actually have it follow you, and then when things die inside of it, they blow up and they leave a cloud, which is another modifier. This is one of the biggest damage things of our build, and we'll go into it, but this is super important because we also have another talent just to apply Plague Burst. So for modifiers, we have increased area of effect, we have ailment damage, we have summon allies explode upon cast if they're inside the area of effect, which is why we have feeding storm, and very important for single target boss damage. Allows skill to be cast at the location of the cursor. Now this is much better than having it follow you because you don't have to get as close to the packs that you're fighting. Then we have Noxious Smog, which when things die, they leave a poisonous cloud, which deals damage over time. This does a lot of damage. Besides stacking up ailments super quickly, it just does a lot of damage. Like probably one of the highest damage, basically modifiers or skills in this build. Increased explosion damage for each ailment stack a monster has, which is also really good damage when you're facing a lot of enemies, and then critical damage increase. Now after that, we're going into Feeding Swarm because that's tied into Plague Burst. So one of the big issues with Plague Burst and having it in this build and having it as one of the staples of your build is that on bosses without other enemies that you can kill, Plague Burst does nothing. Doesn't do anything at all really. So one of the important things is with Plague Burst and having the spell that it kills our summons and blows them up when we use Plague Burst on those summons. Basically what will happen is you have your summons, you'll Plague Burst, they'll blow up, they'll do that damage, and then they'll leave the smog on the ground or the just field of gas on the ground. So when you're facing bosses, when you're facing things that are single target, you could still get that gas and just have the boss sit in it, which does a ton of damage over time and stacks up that poison ailment. So for our summon, a lot of this really doesn't matter, but we have increased damage for summons because we don't use summons for damage, we only use them to blow up in Plague Burst. Then we have changes of physical to toxic damage. Now this one's pretty decent. Summons explode when they are killed, which is very nice because we're killing them so they explode for a little extra damage. Increased damage for summons. I'm not sure if increased damage actually affects the explosion of them because it doesn't even show the damage in this game of your summons, so I'm not at all sure if that affects it or not, but this does increases damage, explosions caused by this skill, so they explode and deal more damage. So that's why we have Feeding Swarm that's tied with Plague Burst, and that's mainly for single target damage. You usually don't need to use Feeding Swarm when you're facing multiple enemies, and before the boss really you don't need to use Feeding Swarm that much unless you're facing one really tanky elite mob. So next we have Anomaly, which is in my opinion just one of the strongest builds or one of the strongest abilities in the entirety of the game for any enemies that you can control with CC, and that's because the skill's Vortex pulls in enemies multiple times. So usually Anomaly just pulls in enemies once, but with this it constantly pulls them in. It is incredibly strong. Pretty much everything besides bosses that you can CC are constantly CC'd and pulled together, and you can pull dozens of enemies into the center of one of these, which is just going to make them take so much more damage. One's going to die, they're all going to be in a cloud. It's really good. This build, pretty much any difficulty in this game, this build is going to be really good at killing groups of enemies in that. So we change it to lightning damage as well for our shock, and then we have skill allows casting of it twice, which is also super good because instead of it's still in one cooldown, and what I like to do is place down a Plague Burst, and if there's enemies all around the area that are either coming in or range, what you can do is place a Vortex over here, a Vortex over here, and since they're also touching each other, the enemies will get pulled back and forth in between those and still just be CC'd, and you can pull more enemies closer together with having the two. It's super good. And then the last is increased ailment damage to enemies inside the Vortex, which is super good because this is all ailment damage in this build. And the last talent of the build is Solar Fall. This is a very high damaging ability, so damage dealt by the area of effect increases over time, super good. Increases tick rate, just more damage, or faster damage I guess. Crits another one dealing a critical damage, effect as a cooldown, so it just does another AOE every little bit when it crits. We change it to fire damage to get our burn. And then Sunrise, this is the most important one. Area effect becomes static when cast, can be recast to change its location. Now it costs more with this for the initial hit, but what's super good about this, and it really doesn't say, is that usually Solar Fire you have to channel it and it's constantly taking willpower. Now if you just do it, it's not going to take willpower over time, so it just sits there. You can move it around if you want to. Super strong, does so much damage, and especially since all of our abilities are pretty much an area of effect, with our Anomaly pulling them together, we'll pretty much just have all of our enemies stacked together taking damage from all of our spells because they're all area of effects. So Plague Burst is an area, Anomaly's an area, area. Our Lightbringer spawns an area. Our Tear of Ethiel is an area, and then Solar Fire or Solar Fall is also an area. So we're just basically just pulling everything together. All of our spells are dealing damage over time, applying ailments super quickly, and just destroying everything. You'll see in the footage that when you're facing groups of enemies, you destroy everything super easily. The only place this build has difficulty is facing a single enemy, so the boss, which kind of sucks. But I think every build has more of the difficulty on bosses than probably should have. So that is all of our modifiers with our skills. So now we can go into our Gate of Fates and into our passives. So I don't want the video to be super long, even though it's going to be pretty long. So I'm just going to go over the main passives in the Gate of Fate tree. And if you want to just copy mine, I'm level 75 right now. So if you just want to copy mine, you can see it. I think there's a website that you can actually put it in. So I will have that in the description as well. So first off, we go down here and we have critical chance score by 60%, which is super good. Critical chance and critical damage is good in pretty much every build in the game. So then we go into ailment stacks inflicted with critical hits can deal critical damage, which is super good, very important. Then we have when inflicting ailments, the number of stacks inflicted on enemies is increased. Damage out from sources other than those that deal damage over time is decreased. So it decreases our just like initial damage, but better ailment damage and better ailment stacks, which is very good. Then we have hits can usually only apply one ailment type. Now 2 different ailments can be applied with the same hit, which is also super good. Apply more ailments much quicker, always really good. Then we have killing an enemy that is affected with ailments gives you a temporary damage increase buff. Now this is one of the ways we're absolutely destroying any groups of enemies because we're just getting 5% increase, which goes up to 5 times for every ailment, just really big damage increases. Then we have when inflicting an ailment, there's a chance to double the number of ailment stacks inflicted, which also helps quite a bit with just having our ailment stacks stack up as quickly as possible. So then we go down when you damage an enemy that is afflicted with stasis, that they will take the damage again after a few seconds. So this is super good because we do have stasis. So basically just doubling the damage when using stasis on a target pretty much, but it's a pretty big damage increase. And this is one of the survivability talents. A portion of the damage you receive is delayed, and this delayed damage does not interrupt force shield regeneration. So basically when you take a hit, delays part of the hit for a second after, which makes it much less likely that you die in just a single hit, which can happen a lot in this game. So then we go over to the right. We get 2% global life leech, which is super good. This is for the most part all you need when the game's working correctly. I think lifesteal is actually a bit broken right now too. Like sometimes it just doesn't work, but once the game's working correctly, this 2% is probably going to be enough. But if you want more, you can go the 2% life leech for so damage. I didn't go into that. I might go in later when I level up more, but 2% is still really good because you deal so much damage. So then we go up here. This is a very important one as well, but the occult damage that an enemy receives from your attacks is increased with each curse stack they are afflicted with. Now, all of our abilities with how my current gear setup is set up is all of my abilities are going to be dealing curse as well. So this is pretty much just increasing all of our occult damage on targets, which we do have all the occult ailments. So this is a very big damage increase as well. Then we have Fatal Pact. Every ailment that stacks when you inflict is also inflicted on you. Each time you reach 10 stacks of one ailment, that ailment is removed, completely giving you and your allies a buff depending on which ailment is removed. So basically when you apply ailments to a target, it applies them to yourself. When you hit 10, it removes all of them and gives you a buff through this list. I don't have to go through all of them, but they're pretty good buffs and you'll constantly be having this. And the ailments you apply to yourself don't deal much damage at all. You'll see the ticks because you'll just constantly be taking a small amount of damage. It barely moves your health. So these are just some pretty decent buffs. Then we go up a little bit and we have increase your ailment chance with all ailments by 60%, which is very good. We just make sure we have those ailments up as quickly as possible and as often as possible. Then just going up, we have active dodge can now go through enemies. This is pretty good because we don't have the best of movement. We only have one jump that's a cooldown, and then dodges can go through enemies. That does help quite a bit, especially if you're getting stuck in groups of enemies. Then we have 25% deal increased damage when only one enemy is nearby. Now I did this because this build is not super strong against bosses, and bosses are pretty much the hardest thing in the game. Going from killing groups of enemies to bosses is such a big leap for every build, but this helps, and then the ones to the side just increase that more. So then we go up here, and this is pretty much when you deal an ailment, you can get different buffs for a few seconds after using them, and that's pretty much all it is. You can go through. These are pretty big buffs though, so this is a pretty good one to get for the increased damage. Then certain skills that deal elemental damage types have a chance to launch other spells when cast. So when you deal burn, it can drop a meteor. When you deal fire, it can drop a meteor. You can do different things. It's just some extra damage, which does help quite a bit. And that's pretty much all I've gone up to so far. You can definitely copy this if you want to, or just get the main big ones, and you can change up a little bit if you want to. Most of these are pretty important important for the damage that the build is putting out. Gear's a little bit weird in this game right now. Mainly critical damage, ailment chance, critical chance, the increase of damage like how I have the gems or the frost damage and ether on this weapon, and that's pretty much it. For defensive, you mainly want to go health and resistances, not for shield. Gems, maximum health is super good as you can see here. Spell critical chance score is super good for me because, or for this build I guess, because you're going mainly toughness over going more into ferocity. So that's pretty much it. A lot of the gear in this game, and then just damage increases. A lot of the gear in this game is kind of self-explanatory at this point for like damage and defensive stat increases. I'm not using any uniques. A lot of the uniques aren't very good at all, and since you can't upgrade them into legendaries and keep the unique bonuses, I'm not using any right now. So mostly just legendary and rares, just getting, you know, the common best stats that, you know, the cult damage here is really good, you know, all that type of stuff. It's pretty easy to do the statting in this game. So that's pretty much the entirety of the build. I hope this build wasn't too terrible for my first build. Still learning a lot about the build in Wolcen, and with the game kind of being broken and almost unplayable most of the time, you know, that's kind of halting the learning of the game. But subscribe if you want to see more Wolcen videos, more build videos, maybe glitches if I find more. Let me know what you guys think of this build, and thanks for watching.
I always watch your techniques. Courtesy of viewer. No, you be faithful and do what he expects you to. Do what's expected of you, faithful. I've been waiting for you. Reject, we'll have to reject.
Gotta catch my breath. My endurance is waning. Gotta catch my breath. My endurance is waning. Catch my breath.